All right, we started it.
Look at us.
Okay. I had a moment of like my brain melted because I heard myself delayed on YouTube and I didn't mute it, and then it made my brain hurt. But it's okay. We're fine now.
Where you're like, hey, everybody, this is Steve. No, this is Steve. No, this is Steve.
That would be
pretending to be me.
There are a lot of annoying arguments on the internet, and that would probably be at the top of the list of most annoying arguments.
Well, the real Slim Steve, please stand up.
Paul says stupid controversies don't have them. This is the platonic form of stupid controversy.
Welcome to my internal dialogue.
Oh, no.
Internal dialogue?
No, you shouldn't. Eat Taco Bell. Don't do it.
Things that shouldn't become a podcast.
Unless, if John Maddox is listening.
Which he's not.
We're going to pitch you on the worst podcast yet. How's everybody doing? Welcome back.
We did it.
It's been a minute.
It's been a minute and a national catastrophe. It's been a fun few months, huh?
Yeah.
Just
Everything's
one
terrible.
Catastrophe? Just one catastrophe?
Everything is the worst. Everything is the worst. But you know what? We're not here to complain. We've actually had some good news, right? As we sort of like go around the table and catch up, because it's been a long time, but thank God we're all back together. It's the new season of Pop Culture Coffee Hour. We obviously way back, we're still sort of in quarantine. Way back during quarantine in the spring, we started doing like live versions of this, Christian and I, just kind of like, as a lot of things were happening online, like OCF stuff, Y2AM stuff. But then as we started planning for the new season, we're all going to get back into this, do the normal sort of back and forth. And what better way than to have a Let Our Powers Combine, Headscarf Mafia, Wonder Twins, back at it once again for the new season. So here we are, season whatever it is of Pop Culture Coffee Hour, because I've lost track.
1,000.
It feels like it.
I know. Yep. Certainly does.
So a little programming note before we start, right? So this is the season premiere. We're back after the summer hiatus. We're going to be going back to kind of our alternating teams, the way that we were doing before quarantine, and a lot of things just got all kind of like shuffled up. But we did episode 100 together, which was super cool. We did another episode together, right?
We did the Harry Potter one when we were in real life, the three of us together. And
yes.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of fun. So we figured like we'll kick things off. But after this, at least for the foreseeable future, we'll do kind of another big one. Maybe we'll do episode 150 together or whatever. But we're going to go back into the alternating things. Christian and I will be back next Wednesday. We're going to be doing kind of the live YouTube streams and the audio version. And you guys, the Headscarf Mafia, if I can still call you that, I think it's a funny name. You're going to be doing just audio versions. So basically like every other week, Christian and I will be live on YouTube. We'll be doing like a live version, which Ancient Faith will also turn into an audio. And you gals are going to be doing your alternating audio every week. So every Wednesday, some version of pop culture is going to be coming out either on this YouTube channel or on the main podcast feed, which you can find on ancientfaith.com or Spotify, or like I think wherever you get your podcast, basically. So that's the programming note. We're back, right? Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, as we normally start, like, what's new with everybody? How's everybody been since the last time we all got together?
Emma Dunn got hitched.
Yeah,
She did!
finally got married. Yes, third date is the charm. So we had to postpone.
Clarify, she did not get married on her third date.
Yes, as my brother kept saying, he kept being like, "Welcome to my sister's third wedding."
It's very mournful.
Yeah. And as a lot of people, made the whole like, "Well, Orthodox do things in threes" joke, but at least we finally got married. So thanks be to God. It was a wonderful day, and I am 10 days into newlywed life, and I love it.
Yay!
Hooray!
Congratulations!
Thank you.
Yeah. I happily watched the back of your head on Zoom from Texas.
Thank you. I did pay a lot of money to get that hair done on the back of my head, so I'm glad that people got to enjoy it.
Yeah, it looked really good.
A lot of time to think through the details. A lot of time.
She did have that. That's true.
That's good. That might be the biggest news of anybody, actually, since we were last together.
Absolutely. I don't have anything interesting at all, unless you want to hear about OCF.
Of course we want to hear about OCF.
Tomorrow night, Emma is going to be the guest speaker for the kickoff of the return of the 55 Maxims series that we started in the spring. No one who listens to this podcast is going to be shocked that she chose the maxim, read good books a little at a time. And
Nice.
because I can out her here, her only request for it was, I'll do that. Do not introduce me as Father Tom Hopko's granddaughter. So I gotta get it out of my system now.
Now it's out of the bag. Yes. If you haven't had enough of me, I'll be back tomorrow night for OCF as well.
Yeah, there you go. That's all I got.
Yes, and that is available. What's the specific OCF website where that stuff is? OCF
Sure.
everywhere, right?
Yeah, sure. So ocf.net/OCF-everywhere. You can find all of our like big fall stuff we're doing, and the 55 Maxims discussions are included. So you can see the whole schedule and everything.
Yeah. And if you guys remember from quarantine, we put together like this big landing page that had all the different sort of pan-Orthodox stuff from everywhere. If you go to y2am.org/at-home, OCF's stuff is on there. There's actually a downloadable calendar, whether it's Google Calendar or whatever it is. So tomorrow night, if you subscribe to the calendar, you will get a little notification at 8 p.m. Eastern with the Zoom link and all that. So that's all there. If you want to cut out the middleman and just go right to the calendar.
There you go. Perfect.
Cool. That's good stuff.
Ooh.
Christian, what about you? What's new?
I'm like a week away from getting my full independent licensure as a marriage and family therapist in the state of Arizona. My application is going to sit before the Arizona board on Friday. So I am very excited. So if any of you people know anyone in Arizona who needs some help, you can tell them to seek it somewhere with me.
Possibly from you after Friday.
Yes, maybe
Yeah,
I
starting
like
Friday.
just put together in my head that like I just got married and Christian is just getting licensed as a marriage therapist, and I was like, hopefully that's not like a sign that these two things are happening at once.
I can help you, Emma. Actually, no,
After
I
Friday.
can't because ethics and we are friends. I can refer you out.
Wow.
Why is my therapy voice scaring children?
You're
That's
doing it
something.
wrong.
Tell me your feelings.
Yeah, Emma wouldn't do that even if you used the normal voice. Sorry.
No, I'm really just not a big emotions person. So.
Just cry a little.
Stuff it
Pretend to care.
Stuff it down. It worked well for me for many years. Just stuff it down.
No, that's what we use. That's what she uses sad books and movies for. That's the outlet
Yes,
for crying.
yes. I cannot cry on my own. I need something to make me cry.
Catharsis.
Yes.
Aristotle would be pleased. Yeah.
Yeah, and she uses art. So there you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
I like it. Man, I do not have news anywhere near that sort of momentous. We're just back at it at Y2AM. We started Be the Bee. New episodes are coming out every Monday. New small group materials are coming out every Tuesday. New pop cultures are coming out every Wednesday. New 3 Men and a Bibles are coming out every Thursday. New Wandering the Deserts are coming out every other Friday. And new email, new newsletters are coming out every Saturday. So we're kind of like in the swing of things. Although kind of a fun thing that we did is we made new hoodies. We made new Be the Beat hoodies because it's cold outside.
Swag.
More swag. So we have a zip version and a pullover version. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can actually sort of see the link to get it right under the video. So if it's chilly, if it's too chilly and your bones hurt because it's in the 50s and you're not used to it being in the 50s anymore, layer up.
It's not in the 50s where
No,
Emma
it is
and
not.
Christian and I are. I don't know. We don't know what you're talking about.
I was like, wait a minute. What? It's in the what number?
I got
Multiply
really.
that by 2.
Does that come after 115? You mean 150? Got it. Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's more like it. I got excited when we got down into like the 85 range recently.
150 is actually closer to the temperature it is here than 50 degrees. So
That's terrifying.
put that in your pipe and smoke it.
But maybe not outside where you can start a forest fire.
Ooh.
Guys, do we need to talk about gender reveal parties? Is that the other the topic of today's conversation.
Also, could you imagine, like, what if the result was just like, and the gender is non-binary. Also, no, the world's on fire. What a letdown.
Everything is burning.
Like,
Trees
wait a minute,
and
we didn't even
bushes
get an
and
answer out of that? Come on.
Yeah.
Oh, everything is the worst.
Gender reveal parties.
But why?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just as another sign of 2020. Everything is awful, except
Yep.
this coffee. This coffee's good.
How good
don't
is
know.
it, Steve?
It's so good that I will sip on it intermittently throughout the course of our discussion.
One of my kids said that to me this morning when I was teaching. She was like, whenever you give us directions, you always take a sip of coffee. And I was like, okay, I don't need your sass.
You don't know my life.
Are you just trying to kind of like let it like seep in with dramatic effect and stuff?
Probably. I'm like, so you're going to turn to the next page in your book and dramatically sip my coffee while they turn.
That's funny. I bet it's a lot like being like constantly on TV for your kids. They're looking at you a different way than they ever would have.
Yeah, it's an absolute nightmare.
Yikes.
Tell us how you really feel.
School is not meant to be online.
Is there any sense of when you guys are going to go back?
So we are 100% virtual until October 19th, and then we start a hybrid program. So there's like no end in sight.
Everything is awesome.
Yikes.
And an awkward hush falls over the crowd.
Well, we should get down to it for like, because I feel like Hamilton being available to the masses is one of the highlights of 2020, right?
Indeed.
So
That's right. That's right. If
Let's get
anything
into
was
that.
going to pull this country together, it was going to be Hamilton.
or at least make us happy while we're sad at home.
Yeah. So should we do a little bit of a freestyle rap to introduce this hip opera?
We should not, but I feel like it's gonna happen.
Podcast start without feeling smart, and then
And my tummy's feeling rumbly, so I really feel like I got. No, it's okay. Anyway,
Let's not do that.
now that that's out of our system, we're gonna go ahead and transition away from the feedback into the meat of today's podcast. Christian, we talked about it already, but it's traditional. What are we doing today's podcast on?
we are doing Hamilton. So he knows what to do in the trend. Hamilton. Hamilton. That one.
You really wrapped that chorus very nicely.
Yeah. I mean, I was going for mumble rap. What if all of Hamilton was mumble rap except for the word Hamilton? Every time someone said Hamilton, it was clear. But then it was like, Hamilton.
It definitely was mumble rap to some people because we had to put the captions on for my dad because he was like, otherwise I would have no idea what was going on right now. So.
It was fast. They were spitting fire,
Yeah,
as the kids say.
They were.
I sort of feel like I wish I had watched this with your dad, knowing what you've told me about watching movies with your dad. But maybe some wisdom from Father Nicholas will come in as we go.
Perhaps. One can only hope.
All right. Well, Hamilton is new, obviously. Although it is on Disney Plus now, so like people can get it. You don't have to go to Broadway or whatever it is to get it. But because it's relatively new, because people might not have seen it, I think as is traditional, we should unleash a merry sound to indicate. How's the spoiler porg? You've been spoiled. You've been spoiled. Now we can get into it. Now we can get
Let us
into it.
resume.
Spoilers abound.
Post-porg. The post-porg discussion.
It's a different game now.
Indeed.
It's a different game now.
All right.
Should I start with a little summary?
I think you should.
Okay. Hamilton. It is a roughly 3-hour-long stage production, which originated on Broadway and is now being done all over the place. But it was filmed back in 19. Filmed back in 2016, I think it was. It's been a weird year. And the original cast in New York, and that's the version that's available on Disney Plus, which is where we all watched it. Although I think a couple of us have seen the stage version. It is a very dramatic telling of the life of Alexander Hamilton, one of the lesser known founding fathers, you might say. from his kind of like start in New York, his early political career, his time during the Course of Revolution. It is entirely done in kind of like a Broadwayified hip hop. One of the cool things about it, it's like it's wall to wall song. I mean, it's like a very kind of interesting take on it. And it's his life just kind of like sung from the very beginning until the end. You get George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and the James Madison and the other sort of like big players in American history, and of course Aaron Burr. The two big characters in the production are Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, who of course have their crescendo at the very end. If you remember the Got Milk peanut butter commercial,
I was just thinking about that.
Right?
Who shot Alexander Hamilton?
Well, we're past the spoiler porg, so I can tell you it was Aaron Burr, who was a major character in the piece.
No.
I feel like that's the only part of this story I ever knew from history growing up was about the duel. Maybe that was
yeah. Possibly because of that peanut butter commercial or the milk commercial.
No, I think I was just paying attention in history class. I don't remember learning it from a milk commercial.
Nerd alert.
Yeah, it's true.
Whatever the source of that knowledge. that's basically it. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. It's the life and times of Alexander Hamilton, as told through his eyes, as told through the eyes of the people around him. His wife is also a really important character in the piece, and we're going to get all up into this. But I don't know. What did you guys think of it?
I mean, I don't want to go first. I feel like but I enjoyed it. I really like retellings of historical stories, like both real history and like stories that are set in a particular era of history kind of being updated, which I guess you didn't really say in the summary, did you? But it's a retelling, but it also isn't a little bit, like in the way that it's done, so which we can get into later. And I think that for me is like the most impactful part of it, is like sort of the not just the telling of Alexander Hamilton's story, but the retelling of it for our benefit.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I remember hearing the music for a long time before kind of like getting any kind of other introduction to it whatsoever, but I thought it was great. I saw it live in Chicago and it was not that great, sadly, live in Chicago.
That's a shame.
I know, like it was just like, I think it sort of felt like the JV team, like if you know, like the New York people are like the varsity folks, it's like the people in Chicago are kind of like JV, because it's not, I mean, it's really, the acting was incredible. Chicago is a great acting city, but all the people who want to make it big on Broadway go to New York, right? So like you kind of get like this scraping the barrel a little bit, I think, to fill a cast in Chicago with like singers and dancers and stuff. Like we had people who are like out of breath doing their like acting and dancing and singing, and they're like and you could like hear them kind of gasping for air at the end of songs. And like George Washington, who had this really big physical presence on stage, you're like, oh wow, look at that huge George Washington. And then he started talking and he was like, we're outgunned, we're outmanned. And I was like, dude, this is not matching right now. And I'm gotta figure that out, what's going on. But anyway, yeah. But I think it's a great show. Really clever. A lot of the cool stage work that they do is just incredible.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. I like honestly haven't really heard of anyone who hasn't really enjoyed it. And I like know a lot about musical theater because I did the plays in high school and my brother has done them, so I was watching it with him. So it's fun to watch with people that know about like singing and stuff like that can really appreciate what they're doing. But then I would say also, as an English teacher / nerd, like I spent a lot of time thinking about like how incredible some of like the rhyme patterns were and things like that, like not even paying attention to like Hamilton's story, but just being like, holy moly, like that is such genius writing. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Like the amount of words that were compressed into these 3 hours, just like, yeah, the rhyming and the sort of choice of words, like very well done. I thought the staging of the show was actually really good. There's like the really beautiful moment in the middle where you see, Hamilton get introduced to his wife, and then you get the rewind and you see it from the sister-in-law's perspective, right? Like there's all these really creative, beautifully done pieces. The end, I'll confess, sort of to Emma's point about sort of like weeping with art, right? I've seen it twice, and the end like gets me both times. Hamilton, as the bullet is coming to him, and you have like the mashup of all of these musical themes throughout the course of the thing that are kind of culminating, right? I mean, I thought there's like this beauty of, like obviously like I'm not throwing away my shot, which he does, right? And this sort of like constantly facing death in the face, and then he kind of confronts it at the end, and like all of these themes come together. And yeah, it's very powerful, very emotional, really well done. I'm not a musical theater fan, I don't think, by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's hard to not enjoy something of just like this level. It was so good. This and Tiger King got us through quarantine.
I'm still actively staying ignorant of what Tiger King is, I have to confess.
Me
Is
too.
that okay?
No, we'll do an episode on it. Don't worry.
No, we won't. I won't. So you'll be doing that episode by yourself. Hey, everybody, this is Steve, and let's talk about Tiger King.
Oh, we're back to the internal dialogue of Steve. It's going to you spoke it into fruition.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I'm Steve. No, I'm Steve. No, Wow.
What do you think about Tiger King, Steve? Well, I really enjoyed it, Steve.
What was your favorite part? Well, my favorite part. So anyway, I think,
I'm enjoying seeing my inner dialogue represented on stage.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like
who's going to tell my
we'll
story?
We'll be all the parts of you. I'll be anger, and I'll be like, that does it. Way to go, San Francisco! You've ruined pizza. So I think the place to start this conversation about Hamilton, since that's what we're on topic about. I think Emma brought it up in a really good way, is just the writing itself. Like, that's what I want to address kind of right out of the gate, because I think it shows up as like one of the most like recurring themes kind of throughout the whole thing. Right? Like, why do you write like you're running out of time? And then there's the whole thing of like Hamilton being the foremost author of the Federalist Papers. But you just get, I think, a glimpse into his mind in a way that you just couldn't have done it any other way than through kind of like this use of hip hop and rhyme and language and all of that, right? Especially as he's introduced in the very beginning, because you get like, Lafayette and John Lawrence and like these other, what's the other guy's name? Hercules Mulligan, right? They're sitting around kind of.
What a great name, by the way. What an absolutely
right?
amazing name.
Changing my name. But like they start with this very basic kind of like early hip hop pattern of like, I'm John Lawrence in the place to be, right? It's like a very like, I'm the baddest mother in the USA. Yeah. But then Hamilton comes in, he's just dropping rhyme after rhyme after rhyme after rhyme after rhyme. I mean, he's like stringing, 6 or 7 rhymes together in like a matter of seconds. And everyone's like, dude, who is this kid? Where is he coming from? And it's just remarkable, I think, to be able to get a glimpse into this particular founding father's capacity for thought,
Yeah, I feel like that's something I learned from the musical. I don't think I really would put thought to just how prolific he was. And I like that they used the form itself to express that, like you're saying, like just the speed at which he raps and the way that the rhymes fit together, like Emma was saying, together kind of gives you an updated sense of like what it would means to have produced that much writing in the course of one not that long lifetime, and how much impact it can have with in the long term, Yeah.
And like just how people would have no idea what to do with him, like you even think about that first rap battle that he has with Jefferson, right? Like Jefferson
in the
very
cabinet
much
meeting.
He sticks to like, the 60 seconds or whatever that he's got with the mic, but Hamilton keeps going past the music. Like he just blows right through it, and ultimately needs to get like the last word in. And it's like you would imagine, you can see just what a rascal he would be. And people being like, God, dude, like shut this dude up.
But that's why I think the stylistic choice like fits his persona on so many levels, right? Like on the one hand, it's not going to be your typical sort of like drawn out aria. Arias are the wrong word, right? For like a Broadway sort of melody. But you know, normally you're sort of chewing on the words and you're sort of taking your time, you dream to dream, whatever it is. And he's just packing as much content into these breaths as possible. Like he's just, you know, like you said, Christian, he's like, he's rhyming 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times before he's stopping to take another breath. I mean, like the frantic pace that kind of the hip hop gives you, right? But even so, it's still very much a fusion. It's like, it's very Broadwayfied hip hop, right? Which is kind of like, I feel like another example of him being this outsider, somebody who like he grew up in the Caribbean. He wasn't necessarily like landed aristocracy the way that like Jefferson and Monticello would have been, or Washington at Mount Vernon would have been. He's kind of this outsider in the same way that hip hop is just kind of this like this art form that sort of develops, you know, on the streets. Basically, it's not really kind of like a high refined sort of thing, and it's lifted up and it kind of is fused with this Broadway style in the same way that this outsider sort of lifts himself up and becomes like embedded in politics. I mean, like from the quantity of information, the weird sort of like outsider thing. I think it's a really cool style that this play is done in this way. Like it captures his, at least the personality that's conveyed in the piece, because I haven't really read about Hamilton, to be totally honest. It fits. It all fits.
I think you can see it well contrasted with the other characters as well. Like Eliza has a lot more songs where she actually like sings and brings like emotion into what she's saying through how she sings, whether it's a ballad or kind of more upbeat or whatever, versus Hamilton is kind of just like pedal to the metal the whole time. Like he's just rapping and, like you were saying, like getting as many words in as he can the whole time, because that's all that matters to him. Yeah,
I feel like as a fellow 3, I resonated very strongly with his like, have to write more, have to write more, have to write more, have to write more. When's the next episode of Be the Bee coming out? When's the next this coming out? Have to write more, have to write more.
Come on,
we
vacation.
can talk about. I would say we can talk about how that didn't go well in the end later on.
Yeah, but did Hamilton make hoodies? That's what I want to know. No.
Also, who was one of the only characters you actually knew about before the play? Hamilton. So 3s win.
See, but that's the thing is I actually didn't know anything about Hamilton probably before this. I was like, oh, like the guy on the $10 bill, like I mean, I mean, he was a president somewhere, right? Like that's how little I knew of him before going in. Like I was like, oh, kind of like, oh yeah, he never was a president. Like I had to kind of have that, you know, story revised in my head in some way. Because like this, you know, Washington and Jefferson and like even John Adams to a certain extent, who's not even a character in the play, but I felt like I knew more about than even Hamilton. But I think that's part of the genius of like just of taking this, you know, this story and this kind of, for lack of a better word, like American icon, and contextualizing him newly, right? I mean, without changing, like, because sometimes you'll see like Shakespeare, right, like set in modern day Italy or whatever, and like here's a dude in like jeans and, you know, it's 1964 and we're gonna do The Merchant of Venice, and that's not how they did this. Like it was still very much colonial America where this was taking place, but there was something that I felt like it lifted it out of the kind of like the frozen place in the past and brought it to life and made these characters seem like people that actually could be engaged with, rather than these kind of like frozen idols that we have of these American heroes from the past. Like it felt like, oh, you can see actually, you know, that they're dudes like any other dude who make mistakes and aren't perfect. And that to me, I don't know, I just thought it was cool to kind of see it come to life in a different way, more than like a biopic or whatever. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Is that how you say that word?
Biopic, yeah.
Oh.
Biological picture.
Biographical
picture.
Yeah.
All pictures are biological if there's people in them.
It's a snapshot of DNA.
Yeah. I think that's in some ways it's like what's really helpful about that is to have like you said, sort of idolatrous version of these historical figures broken down a little bit for you too. You know, we put their image all over everything, like you just said, like our money has their faces on it and everything. And it can be good to like see that they were real people with real struggles, and that, I don't know, that keeps us like, gives us some distance to not let them sit in the sort of an improperly high place in our experience, if that makes sense. Which I think is important even in our own life with our own, like our own mentors or the people that we look up to, or to like see them have flaws and to see them be broken so that they don't, so sort of that our potentially idolatrous version of them doesn't get in the way of who they really are.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Because those flaws are sort of like points of reference, and those flaws are kind of like places of connectivity, right? Because when to use kind of a silly internet example, right? There was that really funny, crude George Washington song that was on like College Humor many years ago. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? The sort of
6'10", killing for fun.
Yes, yeah, that one. Yeah. Which I think was a really, intentionally or not, probably intentionally, a really funny parody of sometimes the way we kind of make these figures larger than life. But they're much more compelling when they're more human, right? And they're also just kind of like, they capture the imagination in the way that they wouldn't otherwise. Like the fact that we're here talking about Alexander Hamilton, that he's kind of a point of reference now for people in the pop culture, that we can kind of wrestle with some of the questions that come out in this thing. Like you said, like it wouldn't happen in a biopic or however you pronounced it. It wouldn't happen in like something like a little bit more stodgy. Like it's really this founding mythos, right? Like this kind of story of what America is and where we came from, that breaks into this present moment and like captures the imagination and like opens up an engagement with the past. And I think by forcing us to engage with the past, kind of forces us to engage with the present as well, as opposed to just being like this face on the money. There's something much more like vulnerable and alive about it. And it's kind of interesting that we don't do this more, right? Like it's like we kind of all know, or we think we know. We have those stories about like Washington, you know, chopping down the cherry tree and so forth, but there was like an HBO miniseries about Sam Adams with Paul Giamatti a few years ago, and like that's it, right? Like, well, how many?
John Adams.
Not Sam Adams. Sorry, John Adams. Yeah.
And then I put the hops in.
The end. But I don't know. It's interesting to me that this like it took until 20. When did the play first come out? The recording that's on Disney Plus is 2016. So what, 2014, 2015?
Yeah, I think it was 2015.
Like it's kind of, I don't know. It's surprising to me that we haven't done this more as a people. We haven't like played with our national myths, and we haven't like played with our figures and actually like brought them into pop culture and engaged with them. Because even the presentation of George Washington, for instance, right, which is like as a kid growing up in the U.S., like there's something different about seeing it portrayed on screen. Like even that sweet sort of swan song of his when he's like, we're going to teach everybody to say goodbye. Like that becomes like a tearful moment for me. This man who has absolute power and kind of is willing to let it all go. Like it brings a lot of this, like this mythology upon which our nation is like founded, and it really like makes it come alive. And I don't know. It's weird that we haven't done this before. I guess that's my only point. I don't know why.
I think that we do have like fictionalizations of history. Like I can think of a lot of historical fiction books and other like film or TV adaptations, but I think what made this so radical was the form. Like he didn't only break the barrier of like, I'm going to do a musical about American history, but like I'm going to do like a hip hop musical about American history. Because to me, that was almost more radical, was the fact that they were like rapping on Broadway. Like those two things never would have gone together in my mind before. So I think that it also kind of speaks to kind of like what we were saying about Hamilton being like this, like idolizing our mentors, our history. Like we also, I think, get stuck in the ruts of how we do things, right? The form that they take, which I think is something we can also take away from Hamilton, is like, maybe we need to change the way we're doing things or change the way we're talking about things in order to have a fresh perspective on it.
a fresh form to sort of like talk about this constant thing, right? Like, 'cause we're still sort of engaging with the characters of the American founding, but we're just kind of doing it in a different way, which just makes it more engaging or relevant or enlivening, right? Like, it captures the imagination in a way that other things wouldn't have, which I don't know. I think it's definitely cool. You make a good point there. I think the interplay between like the underlying message, right, and the form, and sometimes like you can be creative with the form, like the way that an idea is conveyed, and you can still sort of have fidelity to the underlying idea, right? You're just kind of like communicating in a different sort of way. There's like that creativity of communication, but underlying fidelity, or however you want to put it.
Like a really big part of doing ministry, really, right, is the sort of this translation process of an eternal truth that needs to be spoken in a way and in a form that resonates in the current context, right?
Because if people don't pick it up, what's the point? Right.
And sometimes people get that confused. I think like if you contextualize something, like if you use the language, or the, in this case, the music and the poetry that's popular, that you're gonna miss the deep stuff. And I think like this was a more effective way than a history book to get to the deep stuff. Like a history book might get really caught up on just the facts, like the orderliness of what happened and when. And this was very clearly a narrative, an interpretation, and a message about sort of who we are as a nation, that was done by using sort of the context and the culture and the language, if you want to say, of today.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, right, if we can be honest, right, I think we'll begin to see that like that is also history too, right? Like the history books are also trying to tell a certain narrative, and like the narrative is from the perspective of the people who win. Like that's kind of one of the big things, because even like the Washington of this narrative, you like if you pay attention, there's not in any way reference to like him being a slave master and having like all of that kind of stuff as well, right? But you get Jefferson, who Hamilton is kind of anti, and he's like, oh, your debts are paid because you don't pay for labor and like whatever, right? Like he makes all these references to Jefferson kind of like being a disingenuous businessman, right, so to speak. But like Washington, he kind of is like, meh, but like, you're my path to power. So like, I'm kind of going to overlook that. And so does the play. And I think that like that kind of stuff, is like, if we don't recognize that, like that's also a part of like how history is told. Mm-hmm. And of course, like even when we think about our own personal histories and all of this kind of stuff, then maybe even we try to show ourselves in the most like heroic light. This is why when, people get in fights and they come into my office, and the way they remember it, no one ever is wrong except for the other person. Like the other person's always wrong about how they said something or what they did. And because facts ultimately disappear the moment they happen, and they're going to be interpreted so differently by everybody, and even be remembered to the point where it's like, wait, did this happen first? Was it a red car or a blue car? Like I can't remember. It's crazy. It's crazy how much that just goes out the window.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting, right? And that's like that tension between like the communication of truth and like the underlying truth itself. Because I think like the thing that like art does, and I think that like a fresh presentation like this is, it gets us to care. But there has to be that sort of like that vigilance and that care that we're actually like, we're getting the real story, right? Because here, an interesting contrast with me, literally the only thing that I knew about Hamilton walking into this the first time was, one, Burr shot him, which I learned in the milk commercial, not in a book, I'm pretty sure. And two, when I was in college, a friend of mine took a class on Jefferson versus Hamilton. It was like this very intensive history seminar. And I remember we would talk about it during lunch or whatever. And he was telling me at one point that one of the reasons, if not the reason, and this could be like a misremembering, but it's in my head, so I'll share it. One of the reasons why like the presidency has that natural born citizen like limitation on it is because the other founders didn't want Hamilton to ever have the ability to like be president himself. Like at one point in one of his letters, Jefferson actually says like, if this guy ever got a standing army behind him, he'd be like the most dangerous man in America. Which doesn't come across in this like much more sort of hagiographic telling, right? Because this is like very much like, you know, like even like the framing of the play at the very end, like Eliza is the one who is telling this story, and it comes from this like this kind of love and protecting of legacy. And, you know, the play definitely presents him in a very like heroic sort of light. Which side is true? I mean, I didn't take the class. I didn't read Jefferson's letters firsthand. That also is subject to his own interpretation, but our own kind of like biases and our own sort of postures can definitely mythologize things or allow us to have certain blind spots, right? Especially when it comes to like these very difficult things that we carry forward as a nation that we kind of like, we forget because they're uncomfortable or because they don't fit the narrative or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, even at one point, I think that's referenced in the play itself, by the way, like the Jefferson thing where he says like, stand with me in the land of the free and pray to God we never see Hamilton's candidacy. Right? Like there is some sense of like, let's stay away from this immigrant, you know, like he's gonna do some shady stuff, but they all do shady stuff. That's the they're all shady.
Because it's politics and it's all the worst.
Every single one. I know that was for me the thing. I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly the same thing. This is exactly the same. We're the same species.
Yeah.
Look at that. How about that? Same species, same nation.
Yeah.
Under God.
It's funny. Like this is another thing that doesn't come in the play, right? But there's I remember reading at one point about the election between Adams and Jefferson, and how like Adams was running these ads like, if Jefferson becomes president, you know, people are going to be getting their heads guillotined in the streets, and there's going to be sort of like rape and pillage and stuff like that. This Francophile is going to bring the revolution onto our shores, right? And it's like, that might be the most negative campaign ad in American history. And it was done in like 1790 something or whatever. Things never change.
Yeah. Power does funky stuff to people.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, a lot of what this is about, right, is about Hamilton's desire to be in power and how that goes for him, right?
Contrasted with Burr and Burr's desire too, right? Because like the narrative like reaches its crescendo, and you finally get to that duel when Burr finally begins to like act for power as opposed to just sort of like waiting on the sidelines, and it's frustrated, right? And then like that's when he challenges him to the duel, and like ambition collides and one person dies. That rhymed.
There you go. You're starting your own musical now.
You should write that down before I forget. But that's an interesting thing, right? The way that some of these like these underlying passions, like pride or ambition or whatever it is, which good things can come from it, of course. But like when it's unchecked, when it's kind of at the core of our being, and all I want is power. All I want is to be, you know, I want to be the person in the room, like Burr's kind of song, right? This insecurity that is motivating him, this pride, this whatever it is, like when that becomes unchecked and it becomes like the motivating factor of our lives, then.
Right.
Kersplat.
Right. Like what's the shot he's like going after? Hamilton's going after it. Really. I mean, doesn't really seem like from the beginning, it's not super clear like, oh, there's this other facing like bigger than me goal. It seems like, you know, it's about his shot and getting his time in the limelight. And even though like you said, a lot of good kind of does come of it for other people, it doesn't really seem to me like that's ever at the forefront. Like that's the reason that he's, you know, never sleeps and never eats and is always after the next thing. It more seems like that it's him building his own story and his own place in the world for his own sake, and kind of where that takes him. And I think that's like important too. It's not like a cut at, like you said, a cut completely at ambition. We don't want to say like you shouldn't have goals, or you shouldn't have something like to work towards, but are you working towards something that's wholly for yourself, or are you working for something that's for the sake of the world, that's for the sake of others?
What you could have done, and what would have been a very Lin-Manuel Miranda move right there, is say, are you working on something that's holy for yourself, or are you working on something to make yourself holy?
I could have done that, but I am not that clever,
Miranda.
as we all know.
Miranda'd. I just Miranda'd you.
And that sounds a little bit like I just got arrested.
You have the right to be served.
But I think also, to go off of Christina's point, like we look at too how Hamilton is kind of like cuts everyone else out of his life. Like he doesn't listen to his wife, he doesn't listen to his son, he doesn't listen to his mistresses, like really anyone, really.
Plural.
Yeah. And it's just him and his ambition, which, as we keep saying, like ambition is not bad, but I think that's why we have people in our life to kind of help keep our ambition in check, right? So when we just kind of like burrow into ourselves because we think we know what's best for us, that's when we start to really lose sight of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah. Maybe Washington becomes an interesting foil, at least the way that they're presented in the play, because I kind of feel like Washington at least is guided by this principle. Like he talks very poetically about the nation, like especially in his farewell speech. You know, he gives power aside because he has this dream of kind of a nation of laws, not a nation of one despotic ruler. So much of Washington's arc is about like finding my right hand man, right? Not like putting myself in position, but surrounding myself with the people that I need to do what's right because I believe in this country. It's interesting because Hamilton comes across in some ways as a protege of Washington, but also in other ways, like he rejects that. You know, like there's that moment where Washington calls him son, and he's like, "Call me son one more time." Like he's kind of shaped by Washington, but he also he pushes back against Washington. And I wonder if you see much more of this kind of principle guiding the character of Washington, more of this kind of like less doing it myself thing. And Hamilton actually doesn't follow his erstwhile mentor in the same sort of way. Like that becomes an interesting comparison.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that Hamilton's not even looking for Washington as a mentor. Washington is just an avenue for Hamilton. Like he's not looking for someone to guide him, to mentor him, to help him. Like he already knows what he should be doing. Washington is a stepping stone to get there.
Yeah. I mean, even in that right-hand man bit, like Hamilton's kind of internal dialogue is just like, this is my shot, right? Like to rise above my station, organize your information, like all of that stuff is very much like, I'm going to do this to kind of get that. And even as he meets, I mean, first he hits on Angelica, right? And then she introduces him to Eliza, and he's just like, how does that bit go of like, if you could, get a Skylar, it's not a question of if per, but which one, right? Like that is ultimately, he's like, it doesn't matter. It could be Peggy and she sucks. Like it doesn't like,
and Peggy.
People are just objects. People are just objects that he's using in his own story. And that's, I think, where, even though like this story is like sort of, like you said, hagiographical, I don't know what word I just tried to say.
Definitely hagiographical.
Well,
I put it in Word and it didn't get the little red line underneath. So it's definitely
because you broke Word. That's why.
I know words, I promise. They're really trying to show you Hamilton in his best light, in a sort of, I don't know a word to replace hagiography, but now I really want one. And I've also completely forgotten what we were talking about. So there you go. That's where we're at. They're trying to show Hamilton in his best light, and at the same time, you really see how much he's not the kind of hero we really want to have. We don't want to have like the person we look up to be the kind of person who is willing to use people as objects in his own game, and to step over others, or feel like he needs anyone else besides himself to get stuff done. I mean, that's not the kind of leaders and we want, right?
Do you think that the musical?
Go ahead.
Okay, you said it's like trying to show Hamilton in his best light. Do you think the musical, do you think that's the aim of the musical, to show Hamilton in his best light?
I don't know if it's
I
to show
don't.
him in his best light, but I do think it is to show him as like important in this story. Like you've forgotten about him, and you need to like bring him back out of the woodwork. Like that Jefferson's definitely someone we normally like sort of see in a more positive light, I feel like, or we see as sort of like important to who we are. And it's not challenging that necessarily, but it is trying to say like make room in your story of who we are as Americans for Hamilton and who he was. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But then the ending. Go ahead, Christian.
Sorry, I think it just finally dawned on me that what the play is it's a tragedy with a tragic hero. Hamilton is a tragic hero. Like it never really quite connected in my mind that like he's a tragic hero and his flaw is his ambition.
Yeah.
And like that ultimately is what leads to his demise.
Right.
For some reason that like just totally reshaped in my mind. This is not a musical, but it's a tragedy.
Right.
And
hubris is always the like flaw of the tragic hero, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to be like classically Greek here. Yeah.
As we should.
It's about time.
Yeah, the tragic hero bit is interesting, right? Because even like when you asked the question, Emma, I was thinking my mind initially went to like just the end of the play and the way that the little revelation of Eliza at the end, like for me, like subverted some of my expectations and kind of changed the way that I see it. Like she becomes really like the heroine of the piece. She is the jilted wife, right? Who was taken for granted and is cheated on, and she forgives, and she doesn't just forgive, but she dedicates her life to this man who is like totally not worthy of her love and affection. And she spends the rest of her life poring over his thousands of pages of writings and like rehabilitating his reputation, you know, and you kind of have this like almost breaking of the fourth wall sort of thing. Like she's looking out onto the crowd. But there's a different tragedy to that as well, because like any grace that Hamilton is given as a result of this hagiographical kind of treatment, right? Like seems totally undeserved because of his flaws, because of the danger of his character, his ambition, whatever it is. Like he's just kind of at the very end of the day, like he's loved, and he has these people like and the sister-in-law as well. Not
Angelica.
the sucky one, Peggy. Angelica, yeah.
Angelica.
Yeah, I in my head I hear the little melody. Like they both like dedicate the rest of their lives apparently to his whatever, to his legacy. It's something that he can't secure by himself, which is like this interesting other thing about his ambition. It all comes crashing down, and it's the woman that he spurned and that he wrote out of his life essentially because he's climbing this ladder. She's the one who actually builds the ladder for him, which is heartbreakingly generous and sad.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and even the way that they're introduced in the very beginning, right? Like there's that bit where it's like jumping around. Like I did this, I did that, I fought for him, whatever. Like they both show up saying, I loved him. Right. Mm. And ultimately, I mean, even just now as you're saying this to me, like this idea of like they try to kind of rehabilitate him, even like postmortem. Postpartum, hagiographical, and pop culture vocabulary. Pop culture coffee hour, the vocabulary book. English to pop culture coffee hour translations. We should.
Yeah.
You can workshop it.
But the exactly. Love covers over a multitude of sins. That's where I was trying to get. Right, like this idea of love and forgiveness and rehabilitation. The reality is that even post-mortem, like that we could be somehow loved and cared for. I mean, this is so much to like, I remember even when I was first becoming Orthodox and came across the idea of praying for the dead. And I think it's Schmemann, you know, who said that, why do we pray for, it's really weird that none of us are related to him. Because I'm going to quote him, and then I'm also going to quote Hopko, who also none of us are related to.
No, not at all.
Schmemann, I think, says ultimately, why do we pray for the dead? Because we love them. Like that's why we pray for the dead. It's not because of like magic words that make things happen, but it's because of love. And then, you know, again, if only any of us were his grandchildren, then we would probably have heard these things from him growing up. But Hopko then says, right, that forgiveness then becomes kind of like the ultimate expression of love in this world, in this fallen world. And really, like, to me, that makes a whole lot of sense. Because like I can be happy and go along with you all that I want, as long as like we're totally fine and you're not getting on my nerves and you don't ever harm me and all of that, because there's still something that's totally like selfish to that, right? There's still an element that's like, you're pleasing to me.
Yeah.
But forgiveness can become this act of actual love, because it can say that I can make room for you in my heart even when you've wounded me. You're not pleasing to me. There's been transgression of some kind, and it ultimately does become the only real way that I can set myself aside, because I may be entitled actually to retribution. I deserve an answer. I deserve something, but forgiveness can be like, I'm going to put that aside and make room for you again. And that itself is like a taking up of the cross that you see in Saint Eliza here, right? Like, I mean, there's a holiness to her that like is just, I mean, she comes through in the very beginning. You're like, who is this like beacon of purity in this like show about like despicable men, you know,
Right.
doing despicable things.
I also like how you see, like, I would agree that Eliza is a beacon of purity, but I like how you see, like, in her big song Burn, how she, like, does have her moment of, like, screw you, like, I am done with this, like, you have ruined my life, like, I'm taking myself out of the narrative, like, it's not important, I don't want to be remembered like this, but then that she does come to forgiveness at the end, because I think that that's an even more relatable storyline versus if she was just like, I am so pure and holy that I will forgive you because I am so wonderful. But she really has her moment of like, no, like this is not right. And of anger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She repents of this thing that nobody would blame her for, right? I mean, nobody blames her, I think, for burning those letters and for making him sleep in the office, right? Like she has this kind of like this crisis point and she makes a very kind of reasonable human decision, but she repents of that. And then you think of like Burr, right? Because Burr, rightly upset by the fact that his friend doesn't end up supporting him for president or whatever it is, and he picks Jefferson, right? And that becomes, as opposed to a thing that he ends up setting aside, this becomes the thing that takes them to the dueling ground. Yeah, there's something just heart-achingly beautiful about the Eliza arc, and like everything Angelica tells us about her is true, right? Like that she's like this kind and just and like trusting and loving person, and there's no more loyal person that you will see that comes across. And I don't know, it's still hard to wrap my mind around that, right? That she lives for 50 years after Alexander Hamilton, and like what does she do? She establishes this orphanage, and like she does even more in some ways than Hamilton was capable of, and yet his is the legacy that gets put on the stage. Although, right, there's also that subversion, because then at the end that you see like, okay, maybe this is really the heroine of the story.
Right. Yeah, I want to jump back a little bit to what Christian said earlier, just because the idea that like forgiveness is the most like tangible way we can show love in this life. I think that's actually even a deeper way to think about to that verse you quoted about like love covers a multitude of sins. I always feel like we say that and what we mean is like, if you love someone, you'll hide their naughtiness, which, Eliza doesn't do. Like her covering of his sins is more this, like what you guys said, rehabilitation of who he is. It doesn't deny that there was hurt or that there was wrongdoing, but it tries to bring healing to that situation, like that the moment like when they grasp hands again and she like really offers him forgiveness is like the beginning of healing. And Alexander misses out in the end because he's fighting other battles with other people and gets himself in a duel, but like her offering of forgiveness to him is not, it doesn't erase the hurt, it doesn't make it go away, but it's like a medicine or a balm that soothes it, and that's how it's covered up. Does that make sense?
It's there, the wound is still there, the scar is even sort of still there, but it's
right.
like healed nonetheless.
Right. I guess I just say that just because I don't like the idea that when we say love covers a multitude of sins, that we kind of mean like, well, if we love someone, we won't point out that they're like kind of sucking it up right now and doing the wrong thing. Like that's not what
Like it never happened kind of thing, like
it
a
never
willful
happened.
blindness.
Right. Like it never happened. Or if you love someone, you won't point out to them that like they've gone off the deep end. Like, I don't know, like that's not the kind of love that forgiveness offers. Forgiveness offers a healing kind of rehabilitative. Why can't I use adjectives and adverbs today? I give up. I'm just,
There's like a 5-syllable limit.
I know, I don't know what the deal is, but I'm gonna stop trying, but you know.
No, but it's a good point, right? Because like even when we see Christ interact with people in the Gospels,
Right.
and he tells them to go and sin no more, it's
Right.
not like let's pretend that never happened, right?
Right.
There's this very clear like you and I both know what went wrong here. You and I both know like your sin, and yet nonetheless like you are forgiven, and this is going to be a beginning for you.
Right.
And the memory of the sin, right, on the part of sinner, like hopefully is a thing that keeps us grounded and keeps us like penitential and humble. It's not like it just never happened and I get to kind of like walk away scot-free. Like there's still this, you can mourn, I think, in some way, even of sins that you've been forgiven of, because you're aware that there are still consequences to it. I like that word that you use. It's like a balm. There's healing, not like magic that pretends it never happened.
Right. Right.
Well, I think that's why we have confession, right? Like the act of articulating your sins to someone else. I mean, like to Christ. But that's why we don't just have like absolution. Like you don't just get prayers of forgiveness and move on. Like you actually have to articulate your sins, talk about them, think about them, kind of like meditate on them, because they don't just get washed away by like magical prayers or things like that. Like they still are there.
Yeah, good point.
Like maybe a different
thing about like how like learning like that's where to include the reality of something, right? Like the reality of what has happened, and to bear the pain of it instead of like it's fine, no, don't worry, but like don't like that kind of thing. Like that's like this rushing to forgiveness, which is really I think the path to resentment in a lot of ways, right? But real like forgiveness is just like, hey, can we both recognize like something really crappy happened between us, right? Like that was really bad. That was like you said some really mean things to me, and to be like, yeah, I know I said some really mean things to you, and I'm embarrassed about that. I feel bad about it. Well, good, because those are pretty embarrassing and bad things to say. So you probably should go with the feeling on that one, right? Like I know, I'm sorry. Okay, well we can put this behind us, but like let's remember that happens. Like that's, to me, that's true forgiveness, and almost seems to me to be. And I love like the song, right? There's this refrain kind of like in the forgiveness song, after Philip has died, that like all of it's just, I mean, horrible, right? Like ultimately it's like their pain, their shared pain, that kind of like they have to make it through it together, and forgiveness becomes the only way to do that. But there's this refrain in that song of just like they're doing the unimaginable, right? Like they're trying to do the unimaginable, and like it really is, apart from the grace of God, unimaginable that like we would be able to forgive. And I mean, this is one of like the most divine actions that we're capable of as people, right? To like be able to say, hey, like this is a real thing that happened. I mean, even Christ from the cross, right? I mean, this is, I think, where we all ultimately all want to be, is to be able to forgive as we're being killed, right? Like in the middle of being killed, the dude's like, forgive them. They don't know. They don't know. I know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. Forgive them. It's just remarkable, unimaginable. Saint Stephen dying with the same lack of resentment, right? Echoing the words of Christ, forgive them.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm still bitter about stuff that's happened like 10 years ago.
That probably wasn't like nearly on the scale of, at least for me, on the scale of being murdered, you know?
Yeah, it was like not getting into a play.
Oh,
I can't
the Broadway
believe that
show.
he cast that person instead of me.
The Broadway show is bringing up some things.
I had my time in the limelight. Old.
Yeah,
Everyone
I think it's a beautiful observation.
Don't look at me. Look at me. Don't look at me.
And we're back to the internal dialogue.
No, that dialogue is very much external.
People have heard this before.
Yeah.
Today is the most emotionally fractured podcast we've done in a while.
That's a one of the many side effects of 2020. Emotional fracturing, I feel like.
We're all emotionally fractured.
Yeah.
Better than emotional fracking.
That's true. That's true. Can you set your emotions on fire? Anyway, no, I think the thing that the image that's coming to mind is as we're talking about this, like forgiveness, right? And it's the reality of the wound, the balm that goes over the wound, and the way that wound gets sort of like reimagined, right? Because like the betrayal of Alexander Hamilton becomes like this fertile ground in which the love of Saint Eliza really kind of like manifests forth, right? It's like, you know, this very subtle detail that when Christ, not very subtle, I guess, when Christ interacts with his apostles again after the resurrection, like he still has the holes in his hands, right? Like even like this thing, right? That these people don't know what they're doing. Like Christ doesn't paper that over, and Christ doesn't sort of like pretend that the crucifixion doesn't happen. I remember like when we were in seminary, one of our friends, he made this really cool observation. Like every time you see an icon of John the Baptist, right? He's like holding his head on a platter. Like even in the kingdom, right? In like the fullness of things, like he's not presented as being whole. Like he's still holding his head on the platter because he gave his head for Christ. And this wound actually is kind of like reimagined, like looking backwards from the light of the kingdom, and it becomes this opportunity for love, and it becomes this opportunity for sacrifice, and it becomes this opportunity for forgiveness. And even the pain of all of the things that like Alexander subjected Eliza to, like are made kind of, it's weird, right? But they're made beautiful in retrospect, because this is the ground out of which this love and this loyalty, this like perfected sort of love and loyalty come out of. And they can't fully grow, and they can't fully reach their potential if you kind of pretend all of that stuff didn't happen. It's that betrayal that makes it poignant.
Yeah.
Right. It's
feel
still
like
there, but it's like
It's
reimagined.
a victory. Yeah, it's a victory. Rather than, like, of course, like if he was a really great husband, like of course you would want to be like, let's make a fund in his honor. You know?
Yeah. I feel like that's a decent transition to talk about like the one big thing about this musical that we haven't talked about, which is the way that this story was reimagined in terms of race, and how important it is for us to sort of, like you're saying, to face and confront the past, to be able to like actually have some healing that moves forward. You know, it was clearly an intentional choice, not just to use contemporary music and a musical tradition that comes out of Black America, but to recast all these founding fathers who were white guys as people of color, from, you know, different backgrounds, but to show like a different kind of vision and version. And I don't know what that's trying to tell us. I think there's a lot of things, but I'd love to hear what y'all think.
Yeah, that's a powerful thing, right? And it becomes almost this, I don't know, like the first thing that comes up for me is this, sorry, I'm shaking my table as I'm leaning on it. The first thing that comes up of me is like, so this is, we're playing with kind of like these American myths, right? These are kind of like the myths of the founding, whatever it is. Like, this is what it means to be American. These are the kind of ideals that set us out on our national destiny. And it's this very interesting like reimagining of it, in a much more kind of like inclusive sort of way, because, you know, to say that like, because you know, I think some of the tensions that have existed racially with like slavery and post-slavery and so forth, like Americanness has at different times has been like very narrowly defined. Like you have to kind of like look a certain way to kind of like fit into this national narrative and this national mythos. And like it's a very kind of interesting conscious choice to break that down. And even with somebody like Jefferson, right, who again, like we were saying before, like the founding fathers who are presented have their own kind of like very spotty whatever records, right? But like to reimagine like even Jefferson, right, as a person of color, is to kind of like crack open this like this narrative, and to be like, okay, we're going to kind of it's a like a visual representation of this like reimagined America, or an America that's sort of like that reaches more of its national potential, right? Like even if it's historically anachronistic, it's not true in the sort of like literal sense of the word. There's a trueness to this, right? Because like these are words when we say, you know, like the equality of all people before the law, and when we talk about these like ideals of liberty and so forth, like it really applies to all men and women. Okay, this is a way that we're going to like visual, like the truth behind the fact, so to speak, right?
For me, like what it does is it calls us out on where we haven't lived up to that ideal. Like it's showing us still like we founded a country that's going to value liberty and the synthesis of multiple ideas, and you know, like a constitution that we can all get behind, and like all the things that they talk through and they're working out as sort of like the fundamentals of what it means to be America, are still there when you're telling the history. But in making this choice to show people who were not represented in those choices, for me, it says like, yeah, that is who we are. That's who we want to be. And yes, there's also still work to be done, because like, why is it is so jarring, or I don't know if jarring is the right word, but it does shake it up for you when you're like, oh, wait a second, like none of these people would have been in the room. They wouldn't have been allowed in the room like Aaron wants to be. So I feel like for me, it's like both reaffirming and hopeful to say like, yes, these really are ideals as Americans, and also like calling us out where we're like, how far away we are from making those a reality for every person. Does that make sense? Oh.
I also think it helps convey the theme, one of the themes of the musical, which is that like Hamilton was an immigrant, like what we were talking about earlier about how like they made that national born citizen rule because they didn't want him to do it and like be the president and things. Because I read something online that said after that line where he says like, we're immigrants, we built this country, or like we make things happen or something like that, like they had to build in like applause. Yeah, get the job done. They had to build in applause time into the like the script, the music and stuff, because the theater would just erupt in applause like every night after that line. So they actually had to like build in a pause. So I think that it
changed the timing of the play.
It changed the timing of the play, exactly. So I think that casting it with people of color helps us also see how people from all sorts of nations have helped build this country as well.
Right. And even reimagining, and then there's like obviously some like reimagining we're doing in terms of like even what those things might have meant, because like I mean, I don't think that Hamilton in his day and era would have been thought of as an immigrant in the way that we think of immigration now. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but like jumping from one colony to another,
right?
It clearly doesn't have the same exact meaning, but like by playing with those concepts for us, it helps us even more see, like we said, even way back in the beginning, how nothing has really changed. And these are not like idealized perfect people. They're screwed up guys, just like we've got today. And there's a way to, I don't know, there's an expectation that we work for something better, like as a collective community. I don't know, I feel like doing things like that can be really effective. I know it's not exactly the same because it's fiction, but like I saw a setting of Les Mis right after like the 2008 collapse that was set in like post 2008 collapse America, and it was very, very effective to see that story play out in that context. I feel like it's really easy for us to think like, to read Les Mis and think like, wow, that bishop, is so bomb. Look what he did like for this guy who clearly deserves mercy, and look how mercy transforms him, blah, 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 blah. But then when you see it happening in the context that you're actually living in, you're like, oh wait, maybe I wouldn't have done that. Like maybe that's not the choice I would have made if that were like me being called to make that choice. So I think like the pulling it into our own context with the music and the choice of casting and everything makes us wonder like, oh, who would we have been in this story? Or who are we in this story that's still unfolding and that's still being this country that's still being formed? I don't know. Does that make sense? I keep saying, does that make sense at the end of everything I say? That's annoying. I'm sorry.
It does make sense. like reframing those ideals, right? It actually kind of becomes an opportunity for reflection and an
Right.
opportunity for like indictment in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Not like just to sort of like, are we actually like living up to the founding of this, like this promise, right? Whereas the tension between the ideal and the real, which is difficult, nuanced thinking, right? Because like, we can look back with gratitude and be like, it is a good thing that the American founding happened, right? It is a good thing that George Washington like stepped aside and set this precedent for like the peaceful transition of power. And there were things we didn't get quite right on the first draft. And we're
Right.
like, we're constantly like working with the draft.
And that you can't bank too much on the history to sort of like position you to be in the place of righteousness. I need to unpack that a little bit. I think like Orthodox people get this. We do this a lot, really. Like we talk about like, oh my gosh, we were the first people to build hospitals. That was St. Basil. And we like, you know, before the gospel, women were treated so much worse. And like we brought women up to being equal with men. Like we have a lot of like these past narratives about ourselves, but sort of seeing those stories put in our own context makes you wonder like, but are we choosing those things now? And are we living that gospel now? So that, I don't know. I feel like that's a challenge to me when you see it in your own context, to wonder who you are in the story and not just assume you're the good guy because somebody in the past who you sort of feel connected to was the good guy.
Well, I think like what, you know, what you're, again, like the question of good guy, bad guy stuff is questionable, right? And the choices that people have made. And again, the ways that the history is told, right? Like, you know, George Washington had wooden teeth, right? Like what a good guy. What an interesting fact about him. But in reality, actually, he had teeth that were made of ivory and metal. That was at least one set of his dentures. And also another set of dentures made out of human teeth, probably from his slaves.
Yeah.
And like, that is an actual fact about this president, this first president of the United States who had his fair set of virtues, right? But was also known by the Iroquois as the destroyer of villages. Like these are just like actual things, right? And I think like if we're gonna be honest, like we have to like include like all of history. And I feel like it happens in the same time like with the church and stuff too, with even some of like the way that we do hagiography with some of the saints. Like I remember coming across like, so I can't remember which saint it was, but in his stories, it's like, and he fasted from his mother's breast milk from the time of his infancy on Wednesdays and Fridays. And I was just like, that seems to me to be one of those like William Wallace shooting lightning out of his butt, like kind of stuff. Like that's one of those things of like, he breathes fire because he's so magical. But I mean, maybe that happened. If it didn't happen, would it make him any less holy? Like, I don't think so. Like, I don't think that it would. I mean, the dude still is a saint. He still is perfected in grace. Like, how does whether or not he drank milk from his mother's breast on Wednesdays and Fridays as an infant have anything to do with his sanctity? It just doesn't. It doesn't. So maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But like, if we're going to do history right, and if we're going to be honest about our own heritage as Americans, as Christians, as whatever, we need to recognize we've got a pretty like, you know, messy and bloody past. Like that's just reality. And if we're going to get anywhere, like there has to be some kind of like ownership of that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be, especially with the saints, to be careful about not glorifying those things because they've got ST dot before their name. I don't know, like whenever you see like the Holy Royal Martyrs, for example, I don't know. I think it can be really easy just because they're martyrs, especially, to assume that means that they were, you know, every decision that they made was the right one for the people of Russia every time. I mean, I think it seems to be like pretty consistent belief across historians that he didn't really want to be emperor and wasn't all that great at it. I mean, did he deserve to be martyred because of that? No, maybe not. But I don't know, like to try to like justify every decision that someone made because there's good in the end. I don't know if that's healthy for us.
Yeah. Well, it destroys nuance, right? And it destroys messiness. And we don't confess infallibility. Like, we don't necessarily need to be right all the time. I think that's part of like the tension of sort of like saved, not fully saved, right? The kind of like the ongoing struggle of repentance. And when it comes to kind of like the national context, I mean, if we're unwilling to sort of be honest about ourselves as individuals, that makes it harder for us to be honest about ourselves as kind of a nation, as a collective. If we're unwilling to be honest, I mean, that's where kind of moral progress ends.
But like, it's like it's a greater miracle to see your sins than to raise the dead. Like, that's true also of us as a culture and as a society. Like, it's actually a blessing for us in some ways that we're in a moment of reckoning. You know, it seems hard and it's very messy for sure, but like, it's that moment where we're having the opportunity to sort of set things right, and to try to bring some healing.
And it does seem to me like there's like that opportunity, you know, from the beginning of COVID, I had said that like I believed that this was a time for the smashing of idols, right? Like I have believed that and continue to believe that, whether it's like, you know, idols in our hearts or in some ways maybe even like literal actual idols. And I do wonder about this, like when I see like the pulling down of like statues of like Christopher Columbus and like all of this kind of stuff, it's like, well, you know, while we can recognize like, yeah, like, you know, we wouldn't be here if, you know, Christopher Columbus hadn't found this. Like, he also did some really terrible stuff, and maybe we need to wonder, like, is he really worth erecting a statue of? And, you know, saying like, look at our heritage. Like, is that really what we want to point to as like our legacy as people? I mean, I'm not saying yes or no, but I'm wondering. Like, it's definitely made me wonder. And if so, I feel like we probably need to like have pretty good, at least like conversation about owning the stuff that's been done,
Right.
kind of in progress. You know.
Yeah. And
Columbus is.
Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Columbus is an interesting example because, like, apparently when he made his way back to Spain, like the crown in Spain was not happy with the way that he treated people here. So it's not like some sort of like retcon. If anything, if you know, in a situation like him in particular, King, who was it? Isabel and Ferdinand, right? Apparently, like when he got back, they were like, "You did what to the native population? That's not cool." And I think like there was some sort of legal consequences that he actually like it endured back then. So it's not like some sort of like retcon of, you know, like even the standards of his day. He didn't do things that were terribly nice. But that becomes like
this a conversation later that was like, here's more ships.
Well, yeah. It's true.
Conversation also happened.
Things are messy and things are weird, and you know, and that's one of the difficult things. Like, yeah, like.
But I think if there's something we can also pull away from the lives of the saints, is that people are their end. So, like, just to be a very Christina, make a very Christina move and like turn us towards some hope too. Is like we don't forget the messiness of Saint Mary of Egypt's life, but we honor her for where she was at the end of the story. And so I feel like it's important for us in a time that's really difficult, when sins are being brought forward, that need to be reckoned with, that need repentance, that need forgiveness, for us also to remember that no one person and our nation as a whole is at the, God willing, end of our story, and that there's still room for grace to work wherever there is sin, wherever there is fallenness, and to not lose hope that the Spirit is active and doing that work in us and in our culture and in our society.
I don't have a fully formed thought about this, but to me, this is like tying back to what we were talking about at the beginning with Hamilton and how he was full of ambition and want and things, and his life got messy, but like not for the right reasons, or he didn't care enough about the mess in order for it to become to bear fruit. Exactly. So I think like we can kind of learn from him too, in that like, yeah, we make mistakes and make messes of our lives, and sometimes things don't go to plan, but like, as long as we are leading a Christ-centered life and not a me-centered life, like the mess can still come to some good.
That's good.
You know, the thing you made me think, Christina, is I forget, is it St. Basil? who said that like our sins are but a drop of water in the bucket of God's grace.
I know that quote, but I don't know if
I
it's
can't
St.
remember.
Basil.
Yeah, but and like that is like, I think like that's to the point that you're speaking of. Like if that's the case, like if we really believe that, then like we'll be able to like actually see the mess and kind of like be like, hey, but
Yeah.
like we've all been there, right? Anyone? High five? Anyone? Anyone else? So I think that's a really a good word.
What's more freeing in the Christian life than facing your sin rather than pretending, like trying to defend it? Trying to defend the sin only ever digs you deeper into it. I don't know. I feel like it's a good time for us to all think a little more about that and like be a little more willing to say like, yeah, it's there, it's ugly, and Lord have mercy. I don't know. It's not all we have to do, by the way, but maybe that's a topic for another podcast.
Yeah, that's a good quote though, right? Because I think the thing that that can cause us resistance is that it's scary, and coming to terms, making changes, whatever it is scary. But God's mercy is powerful, and if Saint Mary of Egypt can become a holy person, if the thief on the cross is the first one into the kingdom, like there's not much less for us to be afraid of when it comes to having these like hard talks and the repentance that kind of comes from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for turning us in a posture of hope at the end of this podcast, Christina. Well done.
California's on fire.
And we're back.
Christian, I think I need to bake you some cookies. I'm going to send you a care package.
I'm on the whole 30.
Make them
no!
Meat cookies.
2020, whole 30, no!
Okay, well, maybe now's not the time for a diet. Why would you do that to yourself?
It's a great question.
Because quarantine was the opposite of one. Sit in your room, do nothing, eat these
and have
things,
another,
and have some more.
Oh man, this was fun. I'm glad we did this.
Me too.
So next Wednesday, Christian and I are going to be back with another live version on YouTube. This will make it to, I think, the podcast feed by next Wednesday as well. And then like the week after, the girls will be back. I don't know, just to tease what we're doing next. What are like our solo team things? What are our first episodes going to be on? Do we know yet?
I don't remember. We wrote it down somewhere.
I'm looking. I can tell you what yours is. Do you want to know what yours is?
It's going to be New Girl.
Oh, there you are.
I found it.
Google document. I see you in the Google document.
Nice. Way to type. Good stuff.
I know.
And I put ours as the Netflix movie Project Power. I don't even really remember what that is or why I thought it would be a good thing to watch, but it's fine.
Now you're stuck with it.
And it may not be what we do, so don't get your heart set on it, anybody who actually listens to this.
Tiger King. I'm voting for Tiger King.
Steve will be doing Tiger King all on his one-sums.
We'll figure it out.
All right.
This was fun. And we'll do this again, all four of us. Who knows? Maybe we'll do 150. We'll kind of celebrate the next milestone in the history of Pop Culture Coffee Hour.
A history people are watching very carefully.
Yes. Who was going to tell our story? I don't know. Anyway.
Hopefully not your internal dialogue.
That's fair.
All right, guys. I'll see you later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.